I will be discussing, along with my colleagues, Jennifer and Mike, this book, The Zombie Gospel, which seems like an interesting choice, but I thought it was appropriate to our current crisis to bring a little levity, as well as some thoughts that are deeper than surface level. I started watching The Walking Dead a couple of years ago, and I thought it was just this gruesome zombie end of the world series. But then I quickly realized that it actually delves into a lot deeper subject matter about what it means to be human. What does it mean to live among other broken, sinful human beings? And what does it look like to come together and build society when there are no set rules anymore? And I think that the gospel has a lot to speak into those questions. So when I saw this book came out, I was super excited and thought, yes, someone else is thinking the same way as me. And so I invited Jennifer and Mike to join me in this conversation around this book during this time. And
I did not jump on the Walking Dead bandwagon right away. I had a lot of people saying, you should watch this, but the whole idea of watching something about zombies I was just not interested in. Till I think it was like mid-season 3, I was sitting at home one night, had nothing else to do, and I thought, I'm just going to watch the first episode of the first season. And within 10 minutes, I was sold, because I realized it really wasn't about zombies, but it was more about human nature and what that means, especially surrounding a crisis. And so I, of course, binge watched it up until that point.
Watching back freshman year of college when Netflix still had a monopoly on streaming services, and my roommates and I watched it like the whole first season overnight and didn't get much sleep. But I've always been fascinated by like the post-apocalyptic storylines. How do people survive? What does society look like? And The Walking Dead, for the most part, has done a good job with that. Like, it took them like 5 seasons to say it out loud, but it's not about the zombies. It's about us, you know. What does life look like now? How do we rebuild society? Which rules and laws will we follow? Which ones will we not? Parts of the show that I enjoyed were definitely just the human dynamic, right? Of just how do we get back to normal, or what is the new normal? So, and the book, I think a lot of the times these kinds of books can be a little gimmicky, like playing off of too many common themes or like new ideas, trying to like just sell them. But I think Strickland does a really good job at just picking out some of those big picture themes of what it means to be human and how does that shift as society shifts. So it's good.
Yeah, so for everyone watching, if you've never seen or heard of The Walking Dead, a brief synopsis of it is that it's about an apocalyptic virus that infects most of the human population, leaving them as the quote-unquote walking dead or zombies. The survivors make their way through the wreckage and chaos, and everything has changed, and it's up to them to make it a new world. Will they survive is the question. And especially early on, the seasons really do have to deal with this question of like, what does it mean to be human and to be alive? So in the intro and first chapter, what kind of stood out to the two of you the most?
Well, for me, that she ends the first chapter by just asking a series of rhetorical questions, saying, you know, when our world's turned upside down, when things aren't how they're supposed to be or how they used to be, and when our jobs and wealth and status don't seem to matter anymore, what happens then? What makes you human? Will you survive? What gives your life value? And I think those are all questions that a lot of people are wrestling with right now. Certainly in the show, that's the primary plot point, but life looks very different today than it did a couple weeks ago. And so people are wrestling with the question, what gives my life value when I can't go to work? What gives my life value when I can't do all of the things that I used to do. So I think she frames the book well with those questions. But
one thing in the intro I really appreciated, and it's something that's been pointed out to me a lot of times in my life, but not something I really keep in my everyday mind. I'll just read you what the author wrote. We forget at our peril that Jesus called for a new humanity and the end of an old one. He challenged a system based on greed, exposed religious folks as frauds, and announced a new world order. If anyone had a way of creating havoc, it was Jesus. There was nothing neat about the ministry he led or the results it produced. And I have to remind myself that before he came to earth, life was a certain way and everybody lived a certain way. And he really did come and disrupt everything. And very similar to what we're experiencing now, there's a huge disruption in the norm of what we're used to. But I really appreciated her giving us that example of what it was like when Jesus was on earth and how it had a huge effect on people.
Jennifer, I love your thoughts on that. I agree. I thought that was really poignant about how shows like The Walking Dead or being in a crisis like we are in right now really cause us to remember that that Jesus is changing what it means to be human and is bringing about a new humanity and his kingdom here on earth. And you know, she says on the next page, we've been living among shallow and inconsequential things for so long that we've forgotten what it means to be human.
John Lennon, I think, that said, life's what happens when you're making other plans. Like, we live so much of our lives in between these major moments, but really it's all the little things in our days, weeks, years that add up to make what our lives become. I really like this other part of the intro. I think it frames her thesis in general, just saying that the gospel has been co-opted by this religious fairy tale that hijacks and encourages a personal relationship with God at the expense of community. And I don't think that's to undermine the importance of your personal relationship with God, but it should never be at the expense of or in place of a community, because we were created as humans to be in community together. Like God says, it's not good for us to be alone. And there's countless places in the scripture that emphasize that importance. But that's what you see in the show. Like, there are characters that try to live on their own and they are successful at surviving. They're very efficient at it, in fact, but they're not living good lives. And so those are the kinds of themes you see throughout the show that Strickland really unpacks, I think, well in the book.
Yeah, so once we get into chapter 1, she starts with kind of the beginning of the show where Rick, who is this chief, this sheriff of the town, and he gets shot early on and then is in the hospital in a coma. And when he wakes up, the whole world has gone to pieces, and he's having to grapple with this new existence. And that's how the show starts. And I love that that the whole premise of the show is that no one is immune to this zombie disease, similar to today with the coronavirus. No one is immune to it. No one is without risk. And so it becomes this great equalizer among everyone, that it doesn't matter what your job is or how much money you make or how big your house is or what car you drive. You are equally at risk of getting this. And it calls to attention how we typically define our lives, which is around usually what we do. We place a lot of value on what someone does, and there is a pecking order of most valuable jobs, which changes with each generation. Today, it seems jobs that make a lot of money are at the top. speaking of money, the richer someone is, the higher their social standing. When you hear that question, what defines your life? Are you tempted to respond with what you do?
100%. Though that's a question I've always struggled with, because I always feel my job doesn't define who I am. But I'm never quite sure how to answer that question when someone asks it to me. It almost seems very self-serving if you like start bragging about yourself, like I'm this or that, or you know what I mean? It's like, well, that's what I think about myself, but other people might not think that. But it's hard to say, well, I'm this. This is what I do. Well, it really isn't. Well, I guess it is who you are in a way. It just depends on what it is you're doing.
Again, like The Walking Dead, the whole plot is, okay, everyone's jobs are gone. All of your titles are gone. It doesn't matter if you were my boss a week ago. There is no job anymore. You don't have authority over me anymore. So what now? And that is a really pointed question to reflect on. Like, who are you when those titles, accomplishments, and all those things are wiped away? Who are you at your core?
Yeah, I just think that the characters really draw out these dichotomies and what happens when, we are not defined by our IQ or how many A's we get or the amount of facts and knowledge that we have. And that, our value is in more than what we do for a living. She then transitions to talking about this concept of poverty mentality and what happens when we feel threatened and when our livelihood and survival is at stake. And she brings up the example of the Great Depression and how, by 1933, nearly half of America's banks had failed and close to 30% of the workforce was unemployed. And in a real sense, right now, we are facing a similar feel of threat of survival. And even with just how much the financial markets are up in arms, and that's scary for a lot of people. And it tempts us to attempt to hold on to whatever we can and to grasp at whatever is in front of us. And so that looks like taking all the toilet paper, or, hoarding supplies.
My mom's parents they lived through the Great Depression. And even though they became fairly wealthy as they, lived their lives, they held on to a lot of the things that they had done to save money 40 years ago in their life and back at that point. But I remember being at their house and doing the dishes, and my grandma would never let me just run the water down the sink to rinse dishes. I always had to fill the sink with hot water and rinse them that way because she said it was such a waste. Or opening the refrigerator and keeping it open for more than 3 seconds was a waste. And those were direct results of them living through that time of life.
I think what Strickland's grasping at here is this idea that, like, when you are impoverished, you find out the ways to survive, right? You cut out the excess and you hold on as tightly as you can to the essentials. But the point that she's making is that we all live mostly with a poverty mentality. By holding on to all these things, even when we are well off, whatever that may look like for individuals. And there are physical things we hold on to for security. Maybe it's food or water or toilet paper. But then there are like other things, more sentient things that we hold on to, such as the titles that make us feel powerful or significant in our family, in our social structures with friends, or at our jobs. So what are the things that we're gripping onto so tightly to find meaning in our lives that we need to be able to let go of and find meaning outside of?
Yeah, in the midst of that, she talks about Rick, the main character, and kind of the difference that he brings to this. She says, it seems that Rick was built to live for something bigger than himself. He has an ethos of sacrificial leadership. he has a purpose that extends beyond mere survival to being a full human being. And being human is much more complicated than simply staying alive.
Yeah, axiom or question of like, do the ends justify the means? And I think especially in our faith journeys, we have to ask that question all the time. Like, yeah, there is something that may look like it is the right thing to do in the spirit of survival or in the spirit of like doing well at my job to be successful, but does that thing or those deeds justify what we're sacrificing in the present moment? I think that question or that statement really about Rick, like that being human is harder than surviving, like maintaining morality in the midst of an immoral time. I mean, that's all of what the New Testament especially is addressing, is how do we live in the world but not of the world.
Rick is probably my favorite character, just for the fact that he really maintains the idea that it's not about him anymore, it's about other people. He's very good at caring for those around him and putting them first above himself.
Yeah, I love this idea that we keep going around as far as being human versus surviving. And, you know, at what point does seeking our survival mean that we lose our humanity? So she finishes up the chapter by talking about the fact that to be truly human requires risk taking, that to simply live is to do something risky. And she says surviving isn't the same as living. Living means choosing to take risks that make us truly human. And so when I first read that, initially it could seem like, okay, well, how does that apply to today? Well, maybe what's risky is going outside and being around people right now. But I don't know that that's the kind of risk that Strickland is talking about. I think that the risks that make us truly human are different. And so I'm curious as to your thoughts about what risks can we be taking during all of this that will make us truly human?
I think a lot of times reaching out to someone is not a physical risk, it's an emotional risk, because there's the fear of being rejected. It's just like falling in love with someone and fearing them rejecting you, which is like, you know, the worst thing in the world, it seems. But I think at this time, just reaching out to your neighbors, and is there anything they need? You're running to the store. Is there anything you could get someone else so that they don't have to go out and risk, you know? That's all a part of, I think at this time, is how you show people love. And that's a huge part of being human, is loving without the expectation of something in return, or not worrying about if you get hurt in the process.
What's risky about being truly human is putting others above ourselves. And I mean, that's what Jesus taught us to do all the time, right? And so right now, you know, the riskier thing is to not go to work, to not go out, because in doing so, we may not get sick, but we are helping to protect others, and we're putting them before our own desires in the moment. And so it seems kind of backwards, and yet, yeah, I think staying in one place and limiting our physical interactions with other people is riskier, and it does require self-sacrifice. And yet that's what we do for love. That's what we do for others above ourselves. So I really love this discussion that we've been having, and I can't wait for us to continue talking about this book. I would invite anyone who's watched this to join us in reading the Zombie Gospel, if you would like to. You can get it wherever books are sold. And I would love to hear back from you. what do you think it means to be human? What brings your life meaning and value? And what's been your experience with either the show The Walking Dead or kind of these themes of the end of the world and everyone kind of being at ground zero together? We'd love to hear your thoughts either in the comments or by responding via email. So please tell us what you think, and we'd love to get more people into the discussion. So we can't wait to come back and hope that you have a great day.
See you guys.
Bring your tide and bring your shame.